Thank you, Susan, for joining us. And I think we've had many similarities that we've heard from Setareh's and Anjali's and Ananda's presentations. A couple of big red flags also being raised, and a number of questions, or sort of, let's say, elements that are crucial to the way that we conceptualize the projects in trying to be iterative, generative, adaptable, and from their conceptualization, really needing to be quite inclusive and diverse in the teams that are being built, the composition of the teams, but also how that is sometimes really difficult to actually achieve within these quite rigid institutionalized institutions such as museums that are the ones who are curating and the custodians of the collections. So first of all, Susan, I just wanted to ask whether you could very briefly maybe as a PI to the Transforming Collections, which is not finished yet, react to some of what you've heard, and maybe also one of the questions I wanted to ask is whether if there were one concept that we might introduce, a new concept or something important that we would need to do, what would it be for you? So last year at the European Museum Forum, Wayne Modest said, actually what we need is a completely new conceptual architecture if we're thinking around museums and collections, and especially when we're going to be inviting AI into this whole process, and be very conscious of the sort of how, and I think that's what Anjali and Setareh and Nanda have been sort of hinting at also, or saying very forcefully, we need to be careful here. What are we doing and how are we starting it? So that's where I wanted to ask you to maybe comment. I'm sorry, it's a big question, obviously, but do please.
Thank you, Laura, and also thank you, Setareh. It's wonderful to hear you speak again. I want to thank my colleagues in their absence, and also the colleagues that we have from Transforming Collections in the room. Apologies for my voice. I'm still recovering from our 2-day conference last week, and I'm also buying time because that was a massive question from Laura just now. I think that there's absolutely nothing that I've heard between Setareh and Anjali and Ananda's combined distilled thoughts that I disagree with, which makes for a slightly dull answer perhaps, but I'm internally nodding all the time because, not just because we've had the privilege of lovely, rich, resonant conversations last week that brought to the surface many of the alignments I think that we felt between some of our networks between here and the Netherlands over recent years. And I want to emphasize years here because the one word, the one concept, I don't have anything new to put on the table, but I would say, actually, I'm not very good at sticking to one word. So slowness, time, those relationships have developed over time. Those conversations go back at least 7-8 years for some of us, probably a lot longer for others who've been working in and cross-sector for decades. I should say I'm an artist, writer, as well as academic. I'm not really of the sector. I say that, but obviously here I am in this room. I gave a keynote in a room full of really serious art historians the other day. I'd forgot what that was like to be in a room full of only academics, still recovering from that. But yes, I mean, there are many, many things that Setareh said and Anjali and Ananda pointed to that I can only underline. I would say that before we even think about moving forward, moving towards a national collection, we need to be questioning why. What is the motivation? Who is doing that work? What time does it take to do it well and with care? Last week, someone made reference to the AI rush, and I think many in the room were thinking in response, we have to slow it down. What we have to do is not be thinking, how do we catch up? How do we get on that train? It's running away from us. We are the drivers. We are the drivers of the technologies taking shape. We have to remember that. Impressive and shiny and beautiful, weirdly East Asian looking, many of these kind of humanoid robotic types might be, that ultimately machines are not that clever, and we have to take responsibility for their learning. It's called machine learning. We have to train the machines, and we have to ask, what are we teaching them? How are we teaching them? And who are we doing it for?
Thank you, Susan. That was really, really helpful, and and again, sort of giving us a number of really important questions. I wanted to just give the opportunity, Setareh, for you to also maybe say whether there's any concept that you feel, and especially maybe sort of thinking around how you've been talking about how we're learning by doing, what to undo, what to unlearn, what to, and that, some of the really sort of important questions in the Trojan horse element that you were talking about, where your team also said, we're not going to continue unless things change.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about architectures, which is for me also a very helpful sort of mind framework to be in, I would definitely, again, put forward a tool shed, but more also put forward the access question. So the way that we go into this space. And I really hope that this space of the tool shed is a replenishing space. So a space for generative discussions, but also a decentered space. Because I can really imagine for, if we're talking about going towards a national collection, right, and linking up all these different spaces, then naturally one also should move forward towards spaces that can travel along these different contexts. But then how do you situate yourself in such a context? How do you, I think posing the same questions of that Ananda and Anjali also raised in their presentation of getting the subject expertise in, moving in a particular context, doing your research properly, asking the question, why are we here and what are we doing there? And then moving forward to the next step and creating a space that allows for these doubts, allows for a momentarily pause. And that's something that I wish for Tank. I also wish for my own institution. And if we're talking about the rush or the speed, there's a quote that I would like to borrow from disability justice workers, which is moving with the speed of trust. And I find that specifically resonating because it really conceives also of projects, like between quotation marks, as in a different timeline. Not only like 4 years, 6 years, 10 years, but really as long as the project should take, it should be supported.
I think you want to, yeah?
Thank you. I won't speak for as long as I did before, but slightly more than one word. I want to just pick up on the term negotiation that you invoked earlier in relation to archival owners, and that for me tied with what you said just there, Setareh, in underlining movement, mobility, and I thought, shed on wheels. But the thing about the shed rather than the kit is that it emphasises a space, a really modest, humble, this will do space for doing the work. It's not shiny triple high atriums and waterfalls internally and blah, blah. But that mobility, adaptability, and I would say that for us is key within the project in how we're daring to begin to imagine what a national lots of air quotes here, collection might look like, that it has to be not an end point, a fixed point, a stable, static structure, but something in which fluidity, flexibility, adaptability are embedded, and that space always for negotiation, because archives are living, collections are living. If we can remember that, and remember that the audiences or stakeholders or communities, which are too often homogenized in that single term, that word, they're living, they're intergenerational, they travel, you know, with the objects and things, as do their histories and lived living experiences.
Fabulous. I think we're going to end with the moving with the speed of trust, and also with this idea of the urgency on the one hand, but also the need for courage to slow down so that we can reflect and really sort of think of who are we doing this for, who are we doing this with, how are we doing it, and really sort of, think carefully for our next stages while moving boldly ahead, but courageously including as many voices as we can and as many modalities as we can.